Sheila, the sister, the auntie, the daughter?
Well, the sister, as I mentioned inside, we were latchkey kids, so we were home after school by ourselves. Naturally, Sheila had the key, and she was in charge. And we used to go through a cookbook that we had, and she would make me the different recipes. If we didn't have what the recipe called for, she'd substitute it. And she was just a great sister to have, you know. I was getting jumped by a couple of the kids one time. Sheila came charging out the door, knocked one down, hit the other one, grabbed me by the pants and pulled me inside. I mean,
So I'm on student loans, but I personally think they're not enough. So my parents make enough where we're not qualified for a certain amount, but they make too little to, do as much. So I really think that, I don't know, I think there should be more given for students out there and more available for those, like in that middle class.
For that introduction. So my first question is the US-China relations. How did we get here and where can we go?
Well, we got here, and it goes back centuries, actually. But if we start, let's say, a little Cold War, we did not adjust our policies. We thought that what we could do is engage China, convince it that it should be a member of the international community, supporting the international system, because we believed that it was in China's interest to do so. So we defined China's interests the way we saw it, not the way that the Communist Party saw it. And right now, we have a Communist Party that has said, well, thank you very much for being generous after the Cold War, but now we are going to continue with our policies and our posture, which is the Communist Party believes that the United States is an existential threat, not because of anything we say or do, but because of who we are.
I'm really excited for people to read about Lena Richard because I imagine there are a lot of people like me who did not know that much about her. So I'm excited for people to learn more about her story. And I'm excited for people to learn from everybody in this book.
So can you explain what the debt ceiling is? What is it exactly?
The debt ceiling is the maximum amount of money that the US government is permitted to borrow. So the US government every year runs a deficit. It spends more money than it takes in tax revenue, and it has to borrow the difference in order to meet its debt obligations. And so Congress had set the ceiling for total debt at about $31 trillion. And so exceeding that number, which the government needs to do because it continues to need to borrow money, ran up against that ceiling. And the tradition has been that it requires congressional action to raise the debt ceiling and permit the government to borrow more money.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. So how long has the debt ceiling been around? Is it something that just started coming into action or?
And I did see you were part of the legislation with Senator Lori Brown, Keep Guns Out of the Hands of Domestic Abusers in February 2019. Your current committee assignments are Ways and Means Committee, Infrastructure Strategies Committee, Transportation and Modules Committee, Subcommittee, Select Committee on Hurricane Resiliency and Recovery State, Affair Committee, Post-Secondary Education and Workplace Committee. You're an activist for LGBTQ, you advocate for social justice, women's rights, and the environment. Could you please introduce yourself and tell us what your role is in politics of the Alpha and Gen Z generation?
Yeah, absolutely. So I first got elected in 2018 when I was about 28 years old. I'm one of the younger lawmakers in the legislature and do what I can to help amplify younger voices and the voices of generations like mine in the legislature. The majority of my colleagues are not just much older, but have a completely different generational mindset and also are disconnected from what millennials and Gen Z are going through. In particular, just the wealth disparities between the legislature and the greater public is really egregious. In fact, the net value, the average net value of my colleagues is around $6 million. And it is a huge contrast from what they experience to what the everyday person experiences. So I try to bring that voice to everything that I do, to center the conversation on communities of color, on working class people, on the needs of everyday families, to really try to bring the focus back, not just to the special interests, which many of my colleagues are there to champion, but to focus on our constituents. And the reality is that a lot of younger voters, they don't feel inspired right now. They don't feel like voting matters. They don't see themselves in their elected officials. And so I really think it's important to provide that contrast, to be that voice that can really speak to a younger generation. And hopefully it not only inspires civic engagement, but I want to see more young people in office. I think that things are only going to change if people who are in their 30s, even in their 20s, decide to run for office to help shift what the status quo is today.
So how do the Alpha and Gen Z generations differ from previous generations when it comes to
Well, sorry, question. Well, first of all, Gen Z and Alpha are some of the most diverse communities in American history. So this is going to be a generation that's much more Black and brown, much more open to LGBTQ plus identity, incredibly diverse, and also very action oriented on many issues, whether it's issues of economic stability, economic justice, or issues when it comes to mass incarceration and supporting those who are just impacted, all the way to where I stand on climate change and where I stand on gun safety. Like I've always supported assault weapons ban, and that position has not changed. But I know that is actually not going to get you the change that you seek. Protesting is impactful and important, but protesting is not a goal, it's a tactic to get to a goal. So what are other tactics you can explore to get to your goal?
I agree. So are there any chances that their political views will be evolved to become more progressive or inclusive?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that there's always the potential for evolution, but as I mentioned earlier, I feel like values are very, very strong. Like values are not something that can just disappear over, values stay constant for people.